They thought he didn't belong. They mocked, judged, and humiliated him without knowing who he really was. But when he finally spoke, silence fell and reputations sank. The sun shimmered across the ocean as a luxury yacht rocked gently. At the edge of a private marina, its deck already brimming with laughter, champagne flutes, and glittering designer dresses. Music floated over the water, blending with the idle chatter of the rich and powerful who had gathered for what was touted as the most exclusive networking party of the summer. Models posed for Instagram stories, influencers flaunted borrowed jewelry, corporate heirs talked deals with smug detachment. Just as the party reached its perfect rhythm, a man stepped onto the yacht's entrance ramp. He was sharply dressed. Tailored navy suit, polished shoes, no flashy jewelry. A striking presence not because of his clothes, but because of the calm confidence in his stride. He held a small, clean invitation in his hand and nodded politely to the security guard, who glanced at the card, hesitated, then stepped aside. The man walked aboard without fanfare, hands clasped casually behind his back, surveying the deck without intruding. But it didn't take long before eyes turned toward him, curious, suspicious. He was the only black guest on board, and the collective gaze of the elite began to weigh on his presence like lead. The hostess of the event, a woman known more for her husband's fortune than her own achievements, noticed him from across the deck. She narrowed her eyes, excused herself mid-conversation, and crossed the yacht with urgency, masked as elegance. Her heels clicked sharply as she approached, hair coiffed into perfection, voice sweetly condescending. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Are you looking for someone?" The man turned to face her, smiled gentle, voice calm. "No, I was invited." He held out the invitation. She barely glanced at it. Her eyes were already scanning him, from head to toe, searching for clues that would justify her discomfort. "This party is private," she continued, her tone sharpening beneath the sugary coating. "Only board members and partners were invited." He nodded once, unbothered. "I'm aware." But she wasn't listening, or maybe she didn't care. Her expression twisted into performative politeness as she laughed slightly and tilted her head. "Are you with the catering team or the entertainment?" A few guests chuckled nearby. Someone lifted a phone, pretending to check a message but recording all the same. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The moment had already been framed by her assumptions. And when he simply stood there, not rushing to explain himself or beg for approval, her impatience exploded into passive aggression. She waved a manicured hand toward security. "Could you please escort this gentleman off the boat? He seems confused about where he belongs." The guards hesitated, unsure. The man said nothing. One of them stepped forward reluctantly. The tension was palpable now, guests watching with a mix of discomfort and morbid fascination. A few glanced at each other, wondering if maybe she'd made a mistake, but no one spoke up. The man sighed softly, still silent, and gave a nod to the guard as if granting permission. He turned slowly, walked toward the edge of the yacht. The laughter now quieted two awkward murmurs. Someone whispered, "Who even is he?" And someone else muttered, "Maybe a driver. Wrong place." The hostess folded her arms triumphantly. Basking in control? Phones captured every second, already preparing to go viral with a clever caption. Just as the man reached the last step before disembarking, he paused. He turned his head slightly, not enough to face the crowd, but just enough to glance back over his shoulder at the hostess, at the guests, at the quiet sea of judgment behind him. His eyes met hers, not angry, not hurt, just still and impossibly calm. She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, suddenly unsure of herself for the first time that day. But he said nothing. He didn't defend himself. He didn't demand respect. He simply looked as if memorizing the moment for a reason only he understood. Then he turned back around and walked off the yacht without another word. The silence that followed was louder than the music, louder than the laughter had been. Guests looked around nervously, unsure of what had just happened. The hostess straightened her dress and forced a laugh. What? A bright rancher said, trying to reset the mood. But the air had shifted. Something had changed. No one knew yet who he was, but they would, and sooner than anyone expected. The atmosphere aboard the yacht had changed. The music still played, but it now felt disconnected from the mood, like a cheerful song echoing awkwardly in a funeral hall. Guests shifted in their designer shoes, clinking glasses just a little too loudly, laughing a little too artificially, trying to patch the tension that hung over the deck like a fog. Whispers floated between clusters of partygoers, each person interpreting the incident in their own way. That was strange, someone murmured. Why didn't he say who he was? Said another. Probably just some overconfident social climber, a third guest added, smug in their assumption. But not everyone was so sure. Some guests glanced uneasily toward the yacht's crew, noticing a few of them exchanging glances and lowered voices. There was something in their eyes, a kind of nervous recognition, like people who had witnessed something they weren't supposed to. One crew member, a young man in a pressed white uniform, gripped the edge of a serving tray a little too tightly and looked toward the marina where the man had disappeared, lips pressed into a line. Meanwhile, the hostess stood near the bar, sipping champagne with pride in her posture. She had already retold the story twice, to different groups, each time exaggerating how assertive she had been, how she had handled it swiftly, how you just never know these days who tries to sneak into high-end events, or circle of admirers laughed along, more out of habit than amusement. No one dared contradict her, but the unease was spreading, slow and sticky like spilled syrup. Then, without a word, one older man, an impeccably dressed guest with silver hair and the quiet demeanor of someone used to holding real power, set down his drink and stepped away from the group. He pulled out a phone, walked to the far end of the deck, and made a call. His voice was low, his expression unreadable, but his tone made a nearby server pause mid-step. He didn't return to the party right away. Just then, a sleek black boat glided into view from the marina. It moved in silence, elegant and ominous, like a panther approaching prey. Most guests didn't notice it at first. Those who did assumed it was just another delivery or a guest arriving late. But the staff noticed. Eyes widened, backs straightened. Radios buzzed quietly. The boat docked beside the yacht without ceremony. Two men in black suits stepped out and stood at attention. A third figure followed them calmly, the same man who had been escorted off the yacht not 15 minutes earlier. Only this time, he wasn't alone, and he wasn't walking quietly. He was being ushered with silent reverence, the kind reserved for dignitaries and royalty. His expression was unchanged, calm, composed, unreadable. As he stepped aboard the black vessel, the crew on the yacht exchanged glances again. One of them whispered to another, who immediately went pale. Back on the deck, phones began to buzz. Not one or two, but dozens. Notifications started lighting up screens with pings and vibrations. Someone looked down, frowned, and gasped softly. Second guest followed, eyes widening as they read aloud, breaking news. Wait, this can't be real. More people began pulling out their phones. A silence fell over the crowd like a curtain, dropping mid-performance. The words on their screens repeated across devices like echoes. Historic merger finalized. New CEO of global tech conglomerate revealed. Unknown billionaire steps into spotlight. Meet the mysterious businessman behind the $80 billion deal. A picture began circulating with the headline, "The New Powerhouse of Tech. A quiet billionaire with a global vision." The photo was unmistakable. The same man, the same navy suit. Taken just hours earlier at the press conference, shaking hands with government officials, global CEOs, and board members from the company whose logo was plastered all over the yacht. Collective wave of horror swept over the party. Eyes that had once judged him with disdain now darted around in panic, trying to reconcile what they'd just done with who he really was. The hostess's champagne glass slipped slightly in her hand as she stared blankly at her phone. Her face drained of color, she reread the headline 3 times, each word hitting her harder than the last. Her carefully crafted confidence melted away, replaced by a raw, choking silence. Round her, The room spun. Guests who had laughed earlier now looked sick, some stumbling for explanations. Others trying to remember if they had said anything incriminating while being recorded. It wasn't just the embarrassment of mistaking a billionaire for a trespasser. It was the realization that the party, the brand partnerships, the entire event had been built around celebrating the same company he now owned. The yacht was, in essence, his stage, and they had thrown the lead actor off before the show even began. The man on the black boat stood at the edge, watching from a distance. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. His gaze was steady, his face unreadable. But his presence alone now loomed larger than the yacht itself. He spoke quietly to one of the suited men beside him, who nodded and made a call. The crew on the yacht received instructions immediately. Tensions escalated. Rumors spread like wildfire. Had the event been canceled? Were they all about to be removed? Some guests clutched their phones like lifelines, furiously Googling his name, trying to learn as much as they could in the shortest possible time. The man had gone from invisible to unavoidable in the span of 10 minutes. On the lower deck, one staff member leaned against the wall, whispering to a fellow crewman. "I knew it," he said. "He visited the site 2 months ago." I shook his hand, didn't say much, but he was the one pulling strings behind the scenes. His coworker blinked. "Why didn't you say anything?" The first one looked toward the upper deck and replied, "Would anyone have listened?" Above, the hostess stood frozen, phone still in hand, unable to decide whether to approach him or vanish entirely. But it was too late for both. Her moment had passed. The party she had built to flaunt her social superiority had just turned into a stage for her greatest humiliation. And the man she dismissed without a second thought had become the most important person in the room without even stepping foot on her deck again. The yacht, once buzzing with self-importance and hollow laughter, had grown cold with realization. Every guest now moved with hesitation, as if any wrong word could trigger another disaster. Those who had once laughed the loudest now huddled in corners, furiously refreshing their phones, watching the story unfold across social media in real time. Short clips of the hostess confronting the man had already been posted, captioned with phrases like, "When you kick out the billionaire by mistake, and this didn't age well." Views were skyrocketing. Comments flooded in. The public had found its villain and its unexpected hero. On the upper deck, the hostess stood pale and frozen, phone trembling in her hand. Her smile, once weaponized with charm, had disappeared completely. She was the last to hear the full truth. And when someone finally showed her the headline, along with the now viral video of her own voice commanding security to remove him, her knees buckled slightly. She gripped the railing for support, blinking in disbelief. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was the undoing of her entire social image in a matter of minutes. Guests began scrambling. Some whispered apologies into their phones, contacting PR reps in hushed panic. Others tried to delete their own recordings or distance themselves from the incident altogether. "I wasn't part of that," one woman said loudly to no one in particular. "I tried to stop it." Of course, no one had tried. No one had said a word. But the silence back then had been complicity, and now it was fear. The man had vanished back to his black boat, but the weight of his presence remained heavy. Over the yacht, then just as quietly as before, he returned. A small boat pulled up beside the yacht once more, and this time, the reaction was instant. Crew members rushed to position. The guards who had previously escorted him now stood upright with practiced precision. As he stepped aboard again, no one dared breathe wrong. He walked with the same unshaken composure as before. No bodyguards. No dramatic entourage. Only the quiet gravity of someone completely in control of himself and the moment. The hostess instinctively stepped back, unsure whether to hide or welcome him. But she was no longer in charge of anything, and everyone knew it. The staff parted to clear his path like a tide responding to the moon. He moved through the crowd without a word, and the air itself seemed to shift around him. Guests who had avoided eye contact earlier now tried to meet his gaze with forced smiles and murmured greetings, but he offered none in return. He wasn't here for revenge or performance. He was here because this party, this yacht, this entire event, it all now belonged to him. It was his company's official launch into a new era. And he had planned to speak all along, though no one knew that until now. He stepped to the front of the upper deck, where a microphone had been set up for speeches later in the evening. Without waiting for permission, he picked it up. A hush fell immediately. Conversations died. Phones were lowered. Even the music, as if sensing the moment, was turned off in the background. He looked across the sea of tense faces, some regretful, some ashamed, some still trying to act indifferent, and then he spoke. His voice was steady, warm, but sharp enough to cut through everything false. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He didn't need to. "I came today not to test anyone," he began, "but simply to attend a celebration of progress and vision. I brought no cameras, no expectations, and no title pinned to my chest. I walked in as myself, and that was enough to be mistaken, dismissed, and removed. No one dared move." The hostess stood frozen, arms at her sides, unable to look away. He continued, "People often say appearances are deceiving. The truth is, they're not. They reveal exactly what you expect to see. What deceives us is judgment." The silence deepened. Guests glanced around, unwilling to meet each other's eyes. "I watched many of you tonight, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to see how this industry, this generation of power players, would handle the unexpected. Would anyone ask a question? Would anyone step in? Would anyone look past a suit, a face, a skin color?" He paused, letting the words breathe. "Some of you laughed. Some of you recorded. Some of you said nothing. That says everything." A quiet ripple of movement spread as some guests shifted uncomfortably, faces flushed. But he remained poised, not bitter, not accusatory, simply honest. "Judgment," he said softly, "doesn't reveal character. Reaction does, and today many revealed who they really are." The words struck deeper than any insult. There was no applause, no music. Even the waves seemed to still beneath the boat as he stood in silence for a moment longer. Allowing the weight of his statement to settle fully into the hearts of everyone present, he didn't speak for long. He didn't need to. Each word was chosen, deliberate, a mirror held up to every person who had failed him that day, and more importantly, to those who had failed themselves. He lowered the microphone gently and gave a single respectful nod to the crew, then turned and walked. Back across the deck, the same space where he had once been escorted out was now held open for him without a single word spoken. Not a soul dared block his way. No cameras flashed, no phones were lifted. Everyone simply watched him walk through like a storm that had already passed but left everything altered behind it. And when he stepped off the yacht again, no one laughed. No one whispered. Because in his silence, he had said more than any of them were ready to hear. By the time the CEO returned to land, the media had already formed a perimeter. Cameras clicked like machine guns, microphones stretched forward like desperate hands, and reporters shouted his name as he stepped calmly onto the dock. His suit was still crisp, his demeanor still composed, untouched by the chaos behind him. But everything around him had changed. The yacht, now a symbol of arrogance, exposed, remained in the distance like a cautionary tale. On shore, screens glowed with breaking news banners. Business tycoon kicked out of his own launch party. Viral yacht video sparks industry reckoning, and CEO breaks silence with powerful statement. But he didn't stop to talk about the incident. Instead, he walked past the cameras and straight into a modest conference room at a nearby hotel, where he had quietly scheduled a press announcement weeks in advance. The timing now felt orchestrated by fate itself. There, standing at a simple podium in front of a modest audience of journalists and community leaders, he made a declaration that silenced even the most cynical onlookers. He announced the formation of a $200 million initiative dedicated to empowering underrepresented entrepreneurs, specifically those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or rejected not because of merit, but because of bias. The program would fund startups, offer mentorships, and establish grants for business education in inner-city schools. He spoke of opportunity, access, and the need to challenge what society defines as professional, successful, or worthy. And then, With disarming calm, he said, "Sometimes the door you get thrown out of is the one you were meant to rebuild for someone else." The room was quiet, not because of shock, but because everyone could feel the weight of the moment. He never once mentioned the yacht, the hostess, or the guests. He didn't need to. The lesson had already gone viral. This moment wasn't about revenge. It was about redirecting the narrative. Outside the conference, the fallout continued to unfold. The hostess's reputation was in freefall. Clips of her voice, her laughter, her dismissal of the CEO were dissected across every platform. PR firms scrambled to draft statements, but nothing stopped the avalanche. Her sponsors began issuing their own public apologies, distancing themselves from the incident entirely. By the afternoon, 3 luxury brands had pulled partnerships. A 4th revoked her event hosting contract. She posted an apology video in a trembling voice, sitting in a tastefully furnished room, trying to explain how it was a misunderstanding and that she wasn't aware. But the world had already made up its mind. Comments flooded in. Not cruel, but cold. The kind of disappointment that comes when people feel their trust was violated. Her follower count dropped by the minute. Her face, once a staple of high society events, became a cautionary image used in think pieces about class, race, and privilege. Meanwhile, the man she had tried to erase was now being celebrated everywhere. Not because of what he owned, but because of how he had chosen to respond. He hadn't needed to shout, threaten, or punish. His composure had done all the work. Across boardrooms and back channels, executives now referenced the yacht story as a turning point, a reminder that optics alone could no longer shield bad behavior. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the older guest from the party, the one who had quietly made that phone call, stepped into the spotlight. In a short, impromptu interview outside the hotel, he revealed he was one of the earliest investors in the CEO's first company. He'd watched him build from nothing, in rooms that never expected someone like him to be there. And now, with full conviction, he pledged another $50 million into the new entrepreneur initiative, calling it the most meaningful venture he'd ever backed. He said, "I've been in this game for decades, but today I was reminded what real leadership looks like." As the CEO exited the building, flanked not by security but by silence and awe, reporters once again pressed forward. Most were respectful. Now, some even humbled. One younger journalist, clearly new to the scene and perhaps too bold for his own good, stepped forward and asked the question that had been circling in everyone's mind since the story broke. "Why didn't you just tell them who you were?" The CEO paused beside his car, turned slightly, and looked at the reporter with something between amusement and clarity in his eyes. Then he gave a small smile, the kind that carried more meaning than any monologue, and said, "If you have to announce power to earn respect, you don't really have it." And with that, he got into his car and was gone. Not with a roar, not with a trail of paparazzi, but with a silence that echoed louder than applause. Later that night, the city buzzed with conversations about what had happened. Podcasts dissected it, news anchors debated it, and social media lit up with hashtags demanding change in how people are treated in elite spaces. But for the man at the center of it all, there was no need to watch the coverage. He already knew the impact. Not just because of headlines or hashtags, but because we're out there. A young kid who looked like him would see the story and understand something vital. You don't need to fit in to lead. You don't need to explain your worth to those who can't see it. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to know who you are and walk in it.